Good. So good afternoon, everybody. I am Paul Church. I'm Managing Director of Interquest. Welcome to our webinar series. I think this is about our 11th or 12th one now. This is aimed at our HR, staffing and talent professional contacts, but certainly the topics we cover tend to transcend to most. They're certainly not limited to just those in those professions. So as I mentioned just a minute ago, I'm working on our very small Brighton office today to break up the working from home I've been doing since the government's latest U-turn on back to the office, work from home, eat out, back to the office, work from home, don't go out, touch your head, that kind of stuff. So over the last few months, a number of our webinars have fallen under the topic diversity and inclusion, including a webinar we did about a month ago, maybe a little bit longer, around embedding D&I into your business. We also did one which fell under the same kind of banner, I'd say, in terms of how we can help support returning parents to the workplace, which included some of the bias faced by both mothers and fathers on that return. Today, the title is Fixing Gender Bias in the Workplace. And now for me, as somebody who's worked in the tech recruitment market for over 12 years, I've spent a lot of time discussing and also contributing to research with Computer Weekly around women in technology, or rather the shortage of it, as still the average tech teams tend to hold more than 15% females. There's a lot of work that has been done on this topic over the last 10 years, really, but there's still so much to do. And a part of that will probably be fixing gender bias in the workplace to create a more diverse and inclusive environment for all. So I'm just letting somebody, a late joiner, in. Now, typically, gender bias is more commonly associated with what females may come up against, and we will likely discuss more around this angle today. But it does, of course, go the other way as well, and males, of course, face it also. And I think it's really important that I acknowledge that right now, that in terms of anything around D&I, it's crucial that everybody is recognised and that everybody feels like they're in a safe and inclusive environment. So let's let a couple more people in. So today we will just discuss certain situations, but hopefully give some insights into what we can all do with our businesses to make them a better place. Today, as always, I'll ask questions for our speakers, but please do jump in. Just pop your hand up on the option on your Zoom bar. If you'd like to ask the question yourself, if you'd rather I ask it for you, just pop it in the chat box, and happy to do that. Also, if you feel comfortable, do keep your cameras on, just so we can pretend we're all in a room together. But if you don't feel comfortable, that's fine as well. So let's go to our speakers. So firstly, we welcome back Jo Ralfe, who actually triggered me putting together this webinar topic based on a conversation Jo and I had, where Jo mentioned some of the situations she'd faced in her own career. Jo learnt her trade in the TV production studios of Rapid Blue in South Africa, before making her way to London's agency Land. She started in resourcing and earned her Swiss Army knife nickname for the determination and creative ways she finds solutions to production and scheduling problems, whilst increasing staff retention and profits at TMW and Saatchi and UDA. Jo rapidly got promoted to head of operations, so let's let someone else in, and is now at LIDA and is now head of operations at Tribal Worldwide. Throughout her career, Jo has always been keen to give back to the agency and working to increase diversity everywhere she has worked. She co-organises the Agile For Agencies meetup, mentors through BIMA, and was awarded as a Hot BIMA 100 in 2016. She's now on the BIMA in Diversity and Inclusion Council. Jo, is there anything I've missed or anything you'd like to add? And I suppose also just anything around why this topic is so important to you?
Yeah, great summary. For me, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this is because I obviously have experienced sort of sexism, casual sexism, less casual sexism throughout my career. And we really need to talk about it more. We need to talk about what we're going to do about it and how we're going to change it. And we need to create an inclusive work environment where everyone can bring their whole selves, because ultimately that's good business sense.
Perfect. Thanks, Jo. Thanks for coming back to our webinars. Secondly, we welcome Laura Squires. So Laura has worked at Haymarket Media Group for 14 years and with development teams for over 10 years. In the last 2 years, Laura's been involved in the D&I program that is running, setting up key working groups, looking at processes and promoting positive discussion across the board. Being a mother to an 8-year-old boy and a woman in technology for her. Laura, is there anything else such an important topic for you?
No, I think it's the same. Jo echoed the same point. I think we've all experienced some sort of bias throughout our careers, and yeah, the discussion's really important. But it's also to recognise gender bias on both sides, but also, you know, the inclusion part's really important when it comes to D&I, and it's just to make sure that we always think about that too.
Fantastic, thanks, Laura. So, as mentioned, I've got a kind of a list of questions and talking points I'll be going through. But anything pops up for any of the audience, you want to ask anything, just please jump in, put your hand up, or put it in a chat box, and we can throw it over to you. So Jo, if I just ask you first of all, if you could just, I suppose, break down what the term gender bias means to you, and then I suppose maybe give some examples of what you've personally experienced in the workplace, that'd be great.
Sure. I think for me, the simplest way that I look at it is that based on socialization, people have got certain views that because you are a woman, you are a certain way, or because you are a man, you are a certain way, and that they bring those into the workplace, and they expect women to do different tasks to what they expect men to do. A lot of the times it isn't massively conscious though. A lot of the bias that you experience today is predominantly sort of unconscious bias, and based on the way that sort of societal pressures had sort of dictated what they believe the different genders should do, which, let's face it, just not true. We're all people. We can all do various things. You know, there are certain things that women can do and men can't do biologically, but other than that, like, it's an even playing field. And it's really about talking and understanding why we've got these biases and why we have these preconceived notions that women are better at the liberal arts and men are better at STEM subjects, and really understand our own bias and our own unconscious bias. It's funny because I would say I've experienced sort of gender bias quite a bit. I think early on in my career, being in South Africa, working in TV and working on a sports account, I walked in at 21, you know, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to take the world by storm. And I walked in, I was the only woman in a room of about 10 lads all talking about sport. And I don't think any of those men thought about what they spoke about and how they termed things and the phrases they used and whether it was inappropriate or not, or how it felt to be in that room with them when they were talking about it. And it definitely, some of it was a conscious bias. South Africa is a very patriarchal society, but some of it was totally unconscious. They thought they could make these comments about women in general, and they never thought about how it affected me and sort of my career, and what was going to be my career progression. And I think that just sort of illustrates that often when people talk about being, you know, coming up with certain terms, they just make a passing comment and they have no idea how that feels to the other person and how it feels like it's sort of limits their career progression because they are a woman and, you know, they're not going to be able to go anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jo. And Laura, how about yourself? What kind of things have you experienced in the workplace before?
I think it's funny when you look at, you know, I work for a media company, and you know, you can look around the different teams, you know, from events to HR to automotive to editorial. You do get pockets of teams that can be quite predominantly male, and you'll get pockets of teams that can be quite predominantly female, and you know, the conversations probably it can affect people either way depending on what teams they are, but I think it stems from, you know, if you're doing specifically in technology, you know, you're doing projects, my background is project management, and you need to get projects out. It's the like Jo said, it's the odd comment that you get, oh, you know, can you stay? Have you got to go? You know, just because I'm a mum doesn't mean I'm not committed. And I think it's things like that are really important. And I think it's also realizing that just because I am a mum, it doesn't mean there's a confidence issue. You think you have to work double as hard to achieve the same amount of work. So I think it's just I think we need to grow a confidence to have the right discussions in the workplace and have the confidence to turn around and say to someone, have you thought about how that comment affects people? But so many people do it unconsciously, and I don't, you know, but I think it's getting people to realise and think about those conversations that they're having in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And Laura, how do you think these, I suppose, the perhaps negative side of things has evolved over the years? Perhaps maybe, you know, 15 to 20 years ago, whatever, in the workplace, it might have been a more obvious type of bias. Perhaps now it's more subtle, or maybe more unconscious. I'm not sure. But how do you think it evolved for you?
I think we've gone from, I think if I look at sort of my career at the beginning, I think, you know, there was all sorts of conversations that happened in the workplace. And, you know, if some of those conversations happened now, I think, you know, people would not, concerned is the wrong word, but I do think we have less conversations now because you're worried about what you say and whether what you say is right, and you know, you don't want to upset people, which is a shame, because what we're trying to do is to promote an open culture and for people to talk. But it's just about getting people to think about the right conversations to have in the workplace. So, you know, you're mentoring, you're working as a team, you're growing as a, you know, growing as a person and as a team, and be able to have those conversations without the fear of getting things wrong or upsetting someone. So I think we've sort of gone from one extreme to the other. People are more aware, but they don't necessarily know how to open those discussions or how to learn, or, you know, take on the information themselves on ways to behave, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jo, for you in 2020, how common would you say gender bias is in the workplace, and what are the symptoms of this issue in a business?
Well, I mean, I'm going to be honest. I think it's probably slightly more common than we would like to admit. I do think I agree with sort of Laura. The conversation has sort of been driven quite a lot sort of underground, but we do see it in a lot of ways. We see it in returning mothers or fathers, you know, being able to juggle a workload and a sort of a pickup and childcare is very difficult. You probably don't get given the same opportunities because you are a parent. I think also one of the biggest things that we don't talk about is obviously flexible working. If your company doesn't offer it, obviously it becomes much harder to juggle it all. And more than likely, you know, something's got to give. And we know statistically the woman is more likely to give up a career. But secondly, you know, companies that do say they embrace flexible working and sort of part-time and job share, those people in part-time positions don't get the same career progressions, and then they get the same training opportunities as those people in a full-time work. And it's about little things like that. When you start looking at that, you realize there is still a bias. There is still, you know, we're not giving the same opportunities to everyone. And sometimes it is also based on their gender.
Thanks, Jo. And what do you think, Laura, in 2020, what do you think about how gender bias plays out in the workplace?
I think it's on, you know, it's on everyone's agendas. We know that, and it's one of those streams that is on everyone's agenda. But I think we do have to promote more conversation around it. And it's certainly, you know, it is at that management level, that C-suite level, where we know predominantly those roles are held by white heterosexual men, generally. But it's just changing that perception. You know, take the company that I work for. I've been here 14 years. I'm clearly happy at Haymarket. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. But people have been here for a long time, and it's getting those people to change their opinions and move with the times when we talk about things like gender bias. And, you know, change is good, and having those conversations is good as well. But we don't want to isolate people or not include people either. So I think it's understanding both those points.
So if we delve into that a bit more, what do you think a business can do in terms of initiatives, or what it can do to help create an environment which doesn't suffer in that way?
So the way that we're approaching it is, you know, we did speak to a third party to give us some support on not just gender bias. Gender bias was a part of it, and we were focusing quite a lot on unconscious bias. But it's about the people that are there. It's about the culture, and you know, it has to come from top down, but it also has to come from bottom up. The people at the top probably have very different experiences to the people on the ground. So you need to have a mission statement for what does the company want to achieve and why. They need to understand why D&I is so important, you know, why it should be on everyone's agenda, why it should be built into people's KPIs and objectives. It has to be fed down. And then from the bottom up, it's, if you're not happy or you want to see a change and you know how things can change, you need to be able to talk about it. things aren't going to happen if people don't want to get involved and don't want to be a part of that change. So I think it's that bigger picture, and it should be a part of our day-to-day life. It's not a tick boxing exercise, a part of your work. We're a media company. What we write, it comes to not only sort of your processes within, but actually the content that we produce that go out to people. It's a big piece of work, and it's a journey, as what we call it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jo, what do you think about what have you seen that works in businesses, or what would you like to see in terms of initiatives done to help kind of avoid this problem?
So at Trouble, we've got this lovely thing where our shared parental leave uptake is incredibly high with expectant fathers. And we've actually found that has been one of the biggest dial turners. It wasn't so much about empowering females and how we're going to sort of move the dial that way, but giving most dads off, they choose to take 3 months with their child, means that we've got a level playing field. It's not just women going on maternity. We now have fathers going on shared parental. And that means that everyone's experiencing the same difficulties when they come back from an extended period off. And it really has sort of generated more of a conversation about that. And what we've seen as our working parents group has pretty much grown from that sort of experience, where people, men and women, are sharing and talking more and talking about how they share the load more and the mental load and all that sort of stuff. And we've seen that being really helpful. The other thing, which I think is really important, is we go into schools with sort of the likes of BIMA, and we show young women and school children that for women there is an opportunity to go into digital, to go into tech, to go into that sphere. We also talk about apprenticeship schemes and how it doesn't need to be through completely a university degree route. And I think that's really important when we talk about gender bias, because what we've got is the gender bias is so entrenched that we see in schooling, we don't have enough females doing, the likes of science and math and all that sort of stuff. So we actually need to start bringing up and sort of cultivating young talent and interested in STEM subjects from a very young age. And we found that actually, as an overall impact, is probably one of the best things we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I mentioned at the beginning, I've done quite a bit of research and work on women in technology specifically since about 2011. And back then, the average tech team had between 10 and 15% females in it. These days, it's still around the same. So is there anything else, I suppose, from a grassroots level, anything else that we think we need to do institutionally to kind of improve that number, Jo?
I mean, that is a very big question. And the answer is, clearly what we're doing is not working. We're not getting enough sort of young girls interested in that. They do say, I don't know if you know, but there's a sort of a Harvard business study review that you can go in and check your unconscious bias. And I think one of the highest scorers of unconscious bias is women associated with liberal arts and men associated with STEM. Out of all the tests done, and there's about 12 different ones, it's one of the highest ones. It's so entrenched in our society. But what I would say is practical takeaways are apprenticeship schemes, internships, working with sort of partners that identify young women who do want to go into tech, maybe don't have the A levels or whatever, and finding a different route in. Because that way, even if there was an educational sort of constraint earlier on, you're still giving women that opportunity to come in via not the normal degree route, which I think is really important. It's also obviously really important for social inclusion too.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, Jo. I mean, we could probably do a week's worth of webinars just on that topic. But, Laura, you and I have spoken about it quite a bit over the years. I think we even held an event with Haymarket a few years ago. But what else do you think needs to happen institutionally to offset that number?
So in terms of where we're above the 20s in Haymarket in terms of women in technology. That is better, but it's not enough. So it's a positive thing, but it's also understanding what more we can do about that. And what we're trying to do is come up with initiatives to try and improve that number. We're a relatively big company, and actually in terms of our male-female ratio, we're about 50-50 roughly. I think it's 52-48 or something. We're marginally more men than women. and because of that, what can we do with our talent that we've got within, and get them to think about, I've been here 14 years and I've done different jobs, and it's getting people to move around, within. If you like the company and it supports you and it's got the benefits, that's great. So we're sort of working on different ways that we can move talent within as well. So when we talk about gender bias in our balance group and stuff like that, in any of our D&I groups, actually, any of our actions we try and put into 4 pillars. Which is to recruit, to support, to educate, and to celebrate. So any initiative we try to do, we want it to fit into one of those pillars. And we want to bring in new talent and retain the talent that we've got. So, it's setting up, giving people the ability to move and to learn. There's no reason why an editorial person can't start to learn code or testing or project management. So it's giving people the confidence to understand that, the technologists over in one side, go and talk to them. They're not a different breed of people. And giving people the confidence that they can do that, and as a woman, there is no different to working in technology to editorial in terms of the benefits and how it works. In fact, it's probably more flexible. You can pick up a laptop and you can work in engineering or anything in technology wherever you are.
Absolutely.
I think it's just really important. It's the confidence.
Yeah, 100%, absolutely. And we've just triggered not necessarily a question, but certainly a comment from Matt Jones in the box. I'll just read out. But do you know 56% of women leave tech at mid to senior level and don't return? And there is an 18.7% gender pay gap. Shocking, absolutely is. Are you familiar with those stats, Laura? Have you seen that before?
No, I've not seen those specific stats, I suppose, but it kind of makes sense, I suppose. I think with technology moves quickly, and if you do take time out as a woman to have a baby, or even as a man, you take shared leave and everything, things move quickly. And again, it goes back to confidence, doesn't it? Having that confidence to come back and return and to carry on. I think that's really important.
What do you think, Jo, of Matt's stats? I mean, Matt, I know your business, so I'm going to assume those stats are absolutely on point. So, Jo, what do you think of that?
So I know from the BIMA Tech report that was published last year, our stats are slightly lower, I think, specifically around sort of returning parents, but they are very high. I think they're in the 40s. And the reality is, just to Laura's point, things move on so quickly. And if you don't have a plan on how you bed people back in after taking an extended period of leave, whether it's sabbatical or giving birth or, sickness, if you don't have a bedding in of how are you going to get that person back into your company, they will fall out and fall through the gaps. I remember returning from maternity leave and very little support. It's, not terrible, but just feeling totally and utterly sort of overwhelmed, going from, trying to change nappies to suddenly being asked to look at a P&L. And it was just a complete and utter, to be honest, it was an absolute complete and utter confidence smash. My confidence sort of took a real dip for not that long, but it really did. Because you think, how can I have no idea? I haven't read a P&L in, 6 months. So you need a returning to work program to really be able to get the people that are good, they're good, they're also much less risk than a sort of a new hire, bed them back into your company and bring them back up to speed. But that takes investment on the company's part. With regards to the gender pay gap, firstly, we should be publishing more gender pay gap stats. I would like to know whether that 18.7% is whether it's the medium or there's 2 different gender pay gap stats, which can sort of are 2 different barriers on looking at how you look at it. The reality is we probably should be publishing pay bands for every role. We know women are also less likely to sort of ask for a raise. We also know that appraisal processes, women are less likely to push for one if they haven't had one. So if your company doesn't have that all bedded in within your culture, it's very easy for women to fall through the gaps. And you need that resilience within your operating model to be able to go and also offer people pay rises even if they haven't asked for them. You need something that is fair for all. But companies are reactive. We give people pay rises when we think they're about to leave, which is just not the right way to do it.
Yeah, 100%. And we just had a good question through from Martin Warner. So does Laura or Joanne feel that with COVID having force companies to look at how they work and be more flexible in their approach, that this will help or hinder gender bias and give more opportunity for people to return to work after having parental leave, for example. Jo, what do you think about that?
Unfortunately, the stats on COVID and who it's hit worse is women are disproportionately larger, like the biggest losers. And the biggest actual age bracket, I think off the top of my head, is sort of the 24 to 30-year-old woman has been hardest hit out of any other demographic in COVID. But regarding flexibility and companies needing to be more flexible, and yeah, there's no turning back the clock. Like, there is no way we will ever go back to 5 days a week in the office, unless for a specific thing. And I think just with ways of working, tools, operating models, all the things that we had before that we said we wouldn't be able to facilitate mass working from home, we've had to overcome. We've invested in technology, we've invested in scaling people up. So I of course, we're going to be more flexible, and hopefully not having to run away from the office to go pick up your child from nursery, rather be at home, just pop out for 20 minutes and come back, will hopefully make the playing field slightly more level.
Absolutely. And Laura, what do you think of Martin's question?
Yeah, I think what will be really important. It's not about hours in the office; it's about output, and I think that's what's really important. Whether you're a male or a female, the work that you're getting out is what's important. And in technology, that's quite easy to measure. So I think the flexibility element of it will definitely help. Like Jo said, who knows what's around the corner, but more working from home, more output. But if people want to go into the office, they should be able to as well, because everyone has different circumstances. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see, and every company will be so different depending on the size of the company. I think is what will be interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got another question coming in, and thanks for that. And I'll go to that in a second. But Laura, a question on that, just in terms of deliverables. Do you think that there will come a time where it's going to become the norm that our contracts of employment are based more on what we deliver rather than, this is your 9 to 5, these are your hours, this is where you work, that kind of thing? Do you see a world where that happens, or do you think that's a long way away?
I think it will happen, because I think it's going to be based on output rather than hours in the office, because the way we work is going to be so different. Big offices in central London, I think that's all going to change. Obviously they will still exist, but I think the whole dynamic of that will get, I don't think anyone knows what the answer is yet, but I think it's definitely going to change, and hopefully companies will look at it from a perspective, all sorts of perspective, whether you're a man or a woman. And it's the flexible working. There's nothing wrong with doing a period of work, having your lunch late and picking up your laptop late in the evening, as long as you get your work done, especially these days. And it certainly happens in my world. I work with companies all around the world, so time zones are different anyway. So I think 9 till 5 have gone. I think it's going to be much more of a flexible working approach, which should benefit a lot of people, no matter their background.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, yeah, absolutely right. I mean, we don't know the answers yet. We're the guinea pigs in 2020. Hence me putting together these webinars, I suppose. We're trying to find some answers. But we've got another question in the box. So it's from Helen Clark. Do you feel in the workplace that there is a gender bias towards women when it comes to mental health? And mental health is something we've spoke about over the last few weeks. But do you have any infrastructures to support everyone and encourage open conversation without feeling vulnerable that there is a gender bias, or initiatives? Laura, what do you think of that one?
Well, I think probably that people assume that women probably are more open to talking about their mental health, and that's whether that's true or not. Everyone's different, and I struggle with people thinking that we have to classify or put people into buckets, because everyone is so different. And one initiative we do, which works really well, is we have mental health champions around the business, and they are a diverse range of people. So if someone feels they want to talk to someone, but they don't want to talk to their line manager, then here are your mental health champions with different backgrounds. Some are male, some are female, in different parts of the business as well. So there's lots of opportunity to talk to different people. But I think, you can't come up with strategies and process on how to support mental health, because everyone is so different. I think what's really important is to have that open, collaborative culture that gives people the confidence to talk.
Yeah, absolutely. And in InterQuest, the champions thing is something we've done as well. It's worked really, really well, as well as having the employee engagement program, which helps and is available. We also have champions, which I think has been utilised a lot. Jo, anything to add to Helen's question there?
No, I think you guys pretty much covered it. We have mental health first aiders, and they work really well.
Perfect. All right. Thanks for the question, Helen. And anyone else got any more? Please do keep them coming. If we just kind of switch a little bit now. So, Jo, in terms of our recruitment processes, so I think we're talking a lot about kind of internally what's going on in the workplace. So, how do we improve our recruitment processes in terms of gender bias?
Well, I mean, there are various ways you can do it. So I think if we just break it down into a few buckets, the first one is, where are you looking for people? You know, we look at stuff like the staff referral bonus. If you don't have a lot of diversity, you're not going to get diversity from asking your staff to sort of, you know, encourage other people to work from you. You can also partner with specialists, so you can go out and actively sort of recruit in various different places if you do want more diversity. So you need to look at who you're recruiting with, what are your partners, and what are your expectations. Then there's the actual unconscious bias around recruitment. I mean, some people claim blind CVs really help. I'm on the fence about blind CVs, because I do think often what happens is, if they've got unconscious bias as soon as they walk into the room, one thing we started to play with is sort of, instead of letting people say stuff like, I think she'll be a better fit, my gut feel is this person would be good for the role, we've taken that away, and we've tried to get sort of a matrix that you might get marked against. And on that matrix, it's all competency-based stuff based on the job spec. And that means that we're trying to make it slightly more objective about who we hire. But that's something to look at, is like how are you getting people in the door, and how are you judging them?
Absolutely. And Laura, how about recruitment processes for you?
And we're talking about this quite a lot at the moment across a multitude of arenas, but you know, there's been like lots of talk about taking names off of CVs, but the problem is you know, that first stage that might help, but as soon as that person walks through the door, that bias comes back again. So I don't think that's necessarily going to fix the problem. But actually, is the CV in this day and age, does it still add value? I think is a good question. You know, it is about having those conversations with people. And I can just see Matt's question there, just about, you know, soft skills versus learnt skills. It depends on the role, you know, what role these people are coming into. And I think having the conversation and understanding people's background, you know, some people might not be able to communicate effectively, but they might be a really good coder. And I think it's about having those conversations and not being biased on people's background or gender or anything, I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt's asked another one. Thanks, Matt. How do you support hiring managers in overcoming the career gap, Laura? What do you think to that?
I think it's important to have. We do have hiring managers, but it's also important, I think, getting other people from around the business to be involved in that process. You know, with different backgrounds, it might be a different role or different, you know, sector, department in the company. So you get two people's perspective when you're hiring, and looking at all aspects. And you know, it's about it's a conversation, because some people look at, you know, I love communication. I'm not touchy-feely, but you know, I love communication, and that's something I will always look to get out of someone when I'm in an interview. But you know, the tech skills, someone else will look at that. But I think it's important to have multiple people hiring, then you don't fall into that cycle of hiring the same type of people, because then you're going to have the same conversations. And when you're talking about, you know, growing, you know, your area in the company, if you've got the same people doing the same job, it's not very creative or collaborative. You need to make sure you're hiring different people from all different areas.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jo, something we talked about, I think it was just the day before, in terms of things a business should do to try and offset, I suppose, the overall problem around D&I, is appointing a diversity office in your business the solution, or is it outsourcing to external party? Is this the right thing to do? What do you think around that?
It is an unpopular view that I have, but I am very against diversity and inclusion sort of offices or whatever. And the reason why I'm so vehemently against it is, you find that people who go and hire them are generally companies who want a quick fix, and then diversity and inclusion is that person's job. They don't know the company, they've got no buy-in from anyone, they're kind of just imported and told to fix something with very little support. That's not fair, and that's not going to make you have an inclusive or diverse workforce. What you need to do is all of us are responsible for diversity and inclusion. Every single senior management, every single line manager, every exec member, we are all responsible for diversity and inclusion. And I think a lot of people are using it as a quick fix, after the Black Lives Matter stuff, we'll go and hire a diversity and inclusion officer. No, if they're actually going to come in and you're going to give them buy-in, let them actually change how you do things, then possibly, but generally speaking, those companies don't. They just want it to be one person's problem and that person's going to deal with it.
Laura, do you share that view, and did you have anything to the contrary at all?
No, I agree, and I think it comes from the people within the company that want to see the change, and they want it to be a part of their everyday working life. I also think it's not a human resources led thing either. HR aren't there for that; they're there to support it. But it's a business orientated process, and it should be part of everyone's. HR will obviously have an element in what they do, but it's everyone's responsibility and opportunity to make that change. And I do think there's nothing wrong with working with third parties for validation or some research, but I certainly don't think it should be led externally to the people that you've got in the company, especially if you've got people that want to get involved and they want to see change.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a comment and a question from Prema Lava. I hope I've said that right. I like Joanne's view on D&I, but it also needs a lot of educating people. That will require some initiatives focusing on D&I would think. Do you agree? Do you agree, Jo?
Yeah, definitely. I think there are a lot of, so I think, to Laura's point, there are a lot of really good third parties who can come in and sort of help you either, do talent mapping and then put in the training sort of surrounding it. And that's sort of a really good thing to do. And it's totally is about educating, it's education. I mean, it's one thing that we need to do. People are inherently quite selfish, right? We don't think about other people's experience, and having somebody in, especially if they are an external third party, to help facilitate that conversation, I think is very, very helpful.
Cool. Thanks for the question there, and thanks to also Jo. And then we had a question, I'm just scrolling back up, from Owen. Laura, there's a question here. What are companies doing to address this issue, that being the gender bias issue, I'm assuming, in their organizational culture? Is there enough detail there, do you think, to answer?
I think I think companies are trying to address it, but I don't think anyone knows the perfect way to do it. And I think every company is different. We tried by having a D&I committee, but that didn't necessarily work. So we then moved into having sort of networking focus groups where if someone had a particular interest in an area, they could join it and then promote that discussion. And just get more and more people to talk about it, but also more and more people to talk about it and action. And then we feed that up into sort of a strategy piece that then gets fed around the business. So every company is different, and it does depend on the structure. It is extra work, but if companies can start to look at this bit by bit, it's never going to go away. Like I said, it's not something that it's a tick boxing exercise and it's done. It's something that will become more part of our day-to-day working life. So that's what needs to be considered.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks for the question, Owen. Any more questions, please do pop them in the box now. I've got a couple more, and I suppose really for me, it's we've had a lot of great content today. So I just want to kind of really summarize a couple of takeaways from it. From when I say summarize, I mean ask you two to summarize. So Laura, for yourself, what advice would you give to an individual who feels they are in an environment where there is gender bias, or they're suffering themselves personally from gender bias? What advice would you give to that person?
Have the confidence to tell people that you're not happy or not comfortable with the conversation, or have the confidence just to talk about it and get people to think differently. Education and support and research is so important. So people should, take the time to read and research in these areas as well, but have the confidence to get involved. You can't do anything wrong in this space. It's about educating and learning and driving it forward. So I think confidence is really key.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Laura. And same question to you, Jo.
I'm probably going to just reiterate what Laura said. I think, we know the stats on imposter syndrome, disproportionately also affect women and all that sort of stuff, which is basically the confidence issue that she's talking about. It's about speaking up, saying something, and then finding, even if you're uncomfortable to speak up in that exact, situation, there's always somebody in the company you can speak to. and talk about it, speak up, say your concerns, and then help educate those around you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Jo. We've just got a question from Hiran, which has come through to me privately. So, positive discrimination is something implemented by some companies recently. What are your thoughts on it? Who do you think the best, and do you think the best person for the job should get the job, or should women who are underrepresented be taken on, even if they lack some of the experience or skills to take the role on, i.e., take on a female junior developer over a mid-level male to balance the diversity stats? Jo, what do you think about that?
Right, so I think it's a very complex issue, and I'm going to try and give you a short answer, my view on it, and apologies if it doesn't make sense, and stop me if it doesn't. But basically, we know that women always undersell themselves. So a woman junior developer might be the same rate as a mid-weight male developer. We have to understand that what the roles women apply for, and we need to understand how they approach the job market is very different from a man's point of view. Then secondly, your recruitment process. There is no saying with unconscious bias that man is actually, say, better than that woman. You just think they're going to fit better, they're going to be the boys club. But what's really complicated is then you've got the elements of tokenism. I didn't get to where I am today because I am a woman, and I wouldn't want to be in this role just because I'm a woman. But if you've got two candidates for the job, and say if you had taken all the bias out of your recruitment process, and it's done on a skill set matrix, hiring the woman, and they're totally equal, hiring the woman over the man is not a problem, because that comes down to a final decision. It depends on how you're introducing positive discrimination into your recruitment process, and how you're approaching the bias. And it's really hard to get right. And it's a balance that I don't think many companies have actually struck, because nobody wants to be in a job just because they have a characteristic. We are so much more than that.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks, Jo. That made sense. That definitely made sense. So I didn't need to stop you. Laura, what do you think? It's a tough question. What do you think?
Yeah, and exactly. And I don't think any company has nailed this, and it'll take some time to do that. But I think there's another statistic was women will only apply for jobs where they feel they hit 100% of the criteria, whereas the percentage for men is 60%. And in terms of women getting hired, if there is at least 2 women in the running for those final spots, it's 75% more likely going to be a woman that's hired. If it's a man versus a woman, that statistic is quite a lot lower. Exactly what Jo said. It should be about the person and the person that's right for that job. But I do think, I go back and I sound like a bit like a broken record, confidence is so key. I think women need to find that confidence to sell themselves a bit more. And imposters, they are right for that job. There's no reason why, if you've got the same values, same skills, there's no reason why a man should get that job over a woman. And it's that confidence. But having different people doing those interviews is so key to that as well.
Perfect. Yeah, I think good answers to a tough and very, very complex question. Absolutely. Thanks for the question here. And then I suppose finally, Laura, in terms of the takeaway. So Laura, first of all, if you're a business leader or you're involved in processes in the company and you've got the ability to change certain elements of a business, and you recognize that there's a problem with gender bias in the workplace, what one thing would you encourage that the business leaders need to do to try and stamp it out?
Data is quite important to this, and I think companies need to look at data as well. I think there is the conversation, but you will have some leaders that really do focus on data, and it's about collecting that data and actually not proving a point, but just proving that this is the company DNA and this is what we need to try and address. This is what we do really well. And I don't think a lot of these can be fixed at a C-suite level. I think you need to drill it down into the smaller communities within a company, and you fix it for those areas. Every area in a company is going to be so different, and technology will have its own issues, separate to editorial, for example. And have the discussions. And to get people to realise, that the data is really, we've brought up a lot of statistics and data today, and it really does paint a picture, doesn't it, when you see those numbers? Yeah. So I think it's really important to be able to have that data and to talk about it openly, but also come up with how you want to change that. There's no point in saying it's a problem. Okay, it's a problem, but maybe we can fix it this way.
Thanks, Laura. And Joe, same question to you. What's that one thing if a business leader needs to make a change in their business around this issue, what would you recommend?
So I always think there's something very powerful in a leader admitting there's a problem and asking for help. To Laura's point, you should know your stats. I mean, knowing the demographic of your company and where you may be falling short is very important. And once you know that, admitting it, hitting it friends face on, and also talking to your staff about how they would like to see it solved is very important. This is not something that you do as a C-suite and then implement loads of things and hope that one of them take. It's a journey. You don't just do one thing, you do lots of little things, and you need feedback loops that tell people how, you know, that you get a sort of barometer of where people are feeling. And you need to, if the conversation is really hard to facilitate, because often these conversations are, you know, when you've got a group of men sitting in a room and there's one woman and they need to talk about, you know, gender bias, that one woman's going to feel so awkward. If you need a third party also to come in, to mediate and help the conversation flow, also don't be afraid to do that. But sitting in a boardroom and deciding how you're going to change it is never going to work.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great point to end on, I think. Thanks so much, Joe. Thanks so much, Laura. But actually, we've just had one more question come in, so I'll ask that as well. One thing I would recommend is changing the metrics. The metrics has been defined by those who have reached the top before. In order to change the way things change what we measure. Does that make sense, Joe? What do you think of that comment?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of, it depends on what stats you're gathering with regards to like gender and gender pay gap and all that sort of stuff. We also need to be, you know, we need to be very careful about how we lump all those stats together or how we break it out. There are the traditional ways where you just look at everyone's pay and then just say how many women or how many men. But if you actually have a grassroots level where you're bringing up a young female talent from the bottom, your gender sort of pay gap is still going to be, you know, very skewed. So it's about understanding where you are as a company and breaking down the metrics. For instance, we break it down to 4 quadrants. So and we do gender pay gaps based on those, because we found that is a far more useful metric, because we put so much work with them specifically around gender sort of diversity about 6 or 7 years ago, that we needed to be able to measure it differently. You need to understand where you are, understand what your KPIs are, and then gather data that relates to what you're trying to change. Don't just gather data because, you know, it's what we've always gathered. Understand how it relates to your KPIs.
Perfect. And with another question for Mary Ann, what kind of, you were talking about matrices earlier, Joe, in the recruitment process. So what, I'm not sure if this is meant to be matrix or metric, but what kind of metric would you recommend in the recruitment process to ensure the process is objective without being without gender bias?
So what we do is, if it is, so it depends on the type of role, but if it was a developer role, we obviously ask them to do a test, and we would lay out what we would think are sort of the key sort of recruitment criteria we're against, and then we would score them, and we would do more than one person, obviously, recruits for each role. What we also do is, the interview process to us is really important, because it's not just about us interviewing them, it has to be a two-way street. So our interview processes can sometimes be about 5 or 6 stages. For junior roles, there are a minimum of 3. And we try, and it's different metrics along each of the way. And that way we can see where somebody is a well-rounded individual, rather than just how well somebody chats the chat in an interview. And we found that to be really, really helpful in interviews.
Perfect. Mary Ann, I hope that helps. So that being said, I think we'll leave it there. It's been some really, really good content, some really tangible takeaways for the audience. Thank you to the participation today. Lots of questions, really active, which we really appreciate. It helps it flow so much better. But yeah, thank you so much, Joe and Laura. Everyone, next week, we will be talking about employer value proposition. Been a lot of kind of requests for that topic, but again, Joe, Laura, thank you so much for spending an hour of your day, and what you've both had very busy mornings, you said, so thank you for spending an hour with all of us today.
No problem.
Absolutely welcome.
Thanks a lot, everybody. See you later on.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.